as said, I'm from Hull and East Yorkshire Mind, and we have been going in Hull and East Yorkshire since 1976, and we do all sorts of things. So we're primarily a mental health charity, but mental health interacts with all sorts of different things. So we also do things such as housing support, crisis support for some audiences, and we work with about 5,500 people a year, everything from sort of 5 years old up to kind of the upper age limits of 85, 90 years old for some of our people. What do we do? So we do a range of different things. We do talking therapies for children and adults, which is where I come in. That's part of my role. We do group support for different ways and different formats for different audiences. As I said, we do some housing support for people that might be needing it. We have bereavement groups, and also support to find employment is offered by some of our services as well. Who am I? Well, I always find this a really tricky question because I kind of think I'm all sorts of different people. So give you a little bit of a taste of who I am. I've been a dinner lady. I've been a teaching assistant in schools. I've fitted suits for weddings. I've diverted taxis around. That's always fun on a weekend evening. And actually, I then decided I was going to enter into education, and I did 6 years clinical doctoral training in clinical psychology. And from that, I actually took up the role of service manager for the talking therapies team at Hull and East Yorkshire Mind. So on a daily basis, my job is very much about trying to find the right type of therapy for the young person that comes through the door and what that might look like, and that includes a different range of services in different locations, and different sorts of therapies for different people. And there's a little bit of art in getting the right person matched with the right thing that suits them. So that's how I spend most of my day. Me and my team is organising that. And I'm really hoping, I've been asked here today to come and talk to you a little bit about mental health. And when we think of mental health, often we think about the things that can go wrong with mental health. And actually, I tend to think of mental health as being on a spectrum. So in front of you, hopefully, is a bit of a definition by the World Health Organization. But really what I want you to think about is that mental health is in us all the time. So sometimes I have good mental health, sometimes I have bad mental health. It's not a static thing. It moves with us as we kind of go on the journey of our lives day to day. However, often what I'm working with daily is the things that can go wrong, really, when we struggle with mental health. So there are all sorts of different things that people can struggle with. I tend to not talk too much about diagnoses. I tend to talk about the things we struggle with, because sometimes putting people in boxes is really unhelpful, sometimes not, but often I tend to talk about what you're struggling with rather than what's your diagnosis. And the things that we might see might be low mood, or sometimes people will call it depression, OCD, trouble with hearing voices, learning issues, neurological issues. So that would include people that have perhaps had a brain injury, which is one of the areas I used to work, which is lovely work to do with a lovely group of people. We also would include in things like that, things such as personality. The word is disorders, but I would say actually traits of personality. I would argue that actually I'm quite a feisty person sometimes in my private life, and that's a trait of my personality, as much as some people might say actually Kate is disordered, she's a bit feisty. So we tend to talk about traits a lot rather than diagnosis. And this isn't a list of all the things that would come up in a manual as such, things that people can struggle with, but it's some of the ones that people are most familiar with. And we will work with a lot of those at Hull and East Yorkshire Mind in different ways, shapes or forms. So there's different things that factor that can impact mental health. And I think it's fair to say that there's no one thing that can determine whether or not somebody will have a good experience with mental health or a bad experience with mental health. And it's reasonably accepted that this will include your biological factors, so the things that are the genes that you're born into, but also the social environment that you're brought up in. that will affect your mental health, and also the psychological aspects as well. So actually, how resilient are you? How much self-esteem? Good coping strategies. So actually, we tend to talk about mental health as being a biopsychosocial model. Big word just means that actually it's a bit of mixture of everything goes into how you might be on a daily basis. And there's lots of different things that will impact that, such as things like diet, cultural differences, how wealthy your family may or may not be, how much access to support you've got, how much control you've got. So there's one at the bottom there called locus of control, and that's a lot about actually how much we perceive we can affect change in our own lives. And often this is one that people don't consider as being important for managing mental health, but it's actually really, really important. And I've got a couple of stories later on I think that'll help kind of put that into a real life example rather than me talking about textbook stuff. But you'll notice that some of these things are blue and some of these things are in orange. And actually the ones we can affect change with, the ones we can take control in, are often the ones in orange here. So we might all be exposed to these. We certainly all have a diet of some way, shape or form, whether it might be that actually you eat lettuce every day for lunch, or whether you might go to KFC for lunch every day. But these are all things that are within our control, but they do impact our mood. So I'm a terrible crisp person. I absolutely love crisps. They're my one really big weakness. But I also know that actually, if I've not had enough of my fruit and veg, that's probably going to make me feel a little bit tired, a little bit grumpy, a little bit lacking in concentration. But that's up to me to control. I can either eat the crisps and accept that that's how I feel, or I can choose not to eat the crisps. So there are things actually that we can do as individuals that will affect how we feel day to day, week to week, month to month, and year to year. So some of the triggers for poor mental health. So when I'm sitting with a family or a young person, I don't just say, okay, what's going wrong for you? I'll say, tell me about you. Okay. And it might start, and it quite often does start with, what did you do this morning? What did you do? Did you get up at lunchtime? Did you get up at 6 o'clock and go for a run? Did you have breakfast? Did you not have breakfast? Do you have access to breakfast? Because not all young people do. So when we talk about mental health and things that might be people be struggling with, we'll talk about, what does your life look like? So I'll often say to people, do you know, I'm Katie. I don't live in Hull. I live in the East Riding. I have a cat who might quite well turn up at some points. If he does, I am really sorry, everybody. He just loves to be involved. So I'll talk about me as a person, because all of the factors about me impact my mental health. So the fact that my cat does quite like to join in on conference calls at the worst possible time is a bit of a trigger for poor mental health, because it's really embarrassing, but it's part of me. So I will look at all sorts of different things as part of things that can go wrong. But some of the big ones that we see time and time again would include things like access to finances. Are people financially secure? Is their home secure? Is the family a stable family unit that's a good impact, a good environment? Has somebody got a good positive support network around them? Do they have a family member they can go to? Do they have a youth group that actually they feel safe within? What's going on in terms of drugs and alcohol at home? Is that a problem? Is it part of social norm? Is it part of the culture? Is it helpful or is it unhelpful? Difficulties with learning can often be a trigger for mental health, and obviously that's something that we would want to support people with. Belonging to an ethnic minority, we know actually that can be a contributing factor to difficult mental health. Being part of an LGBTQ plus identity can also be a trigger for poor mental health as well. But the biggest one is often about access to resources, is actually, can somebody access those support networks? And I would say actually you can be part of many of those different things. Doesn't mean you will necessarily have problems. It's about kind of getting the right help for you, and that's not the same for every single person. But the important thing to take away from that is actually that having one of these things or belonging to one of these groups does not determine your future. So you may well have a transition from primary school to secondary school, or secondary to school to college. Most of us do that, but most of us can successfully achieve that without experiencing any problems at all. And that is the same for all of these issues and any other issues that might be personal to you. Just because you belong to one of these groups does not mean you are going to struggle. And I think sometimes that's often the worry for people, is that they think, actually, because my family's not very wealthy, I'm going to have a mental health problem. And that's not it at all. As I said before, we've got so much things we can control, and often it's about maximising them. There's a couple of things I do want to focus on that we do see time and time again. And the first one of those is drugs. Now, I'm a big coffee drinker. I love a cup of coffee and I love a good, proper, strong coffee. But coffee is a drug. And I know if I've had a few days where I haven't had coffee, I'm tired, I am grumpy, I'll have headaches, I don't feel very well. So when we talk about drugs, we're not just talking about the ones that often pop into our heads, such as ecstasy or cocaine or heroin or cannabis. We are also thinking about nicotine, we're also thinking about alcohol. Chocolate is also a drug. And for me, caffeine. Caffeine is definitely my weak point. And I think what's important to bear in mind is that often we don't know how we're going to respond to a drug. So I've spoken to many people throughout different ages, what in different places I've worked, where they've said, well, I just tried it the once. And I'll tell you a brief story about somebody I worked with, an adult, actually, he was an adult, had tried a specific drug, and actually ended up in a severe accident, and was very severely brain injured, and his life will never be the same again. So whilst trying it might be appealing, it might be the thing that the people around you are trying, it is important to remember that is you do not know what will happen if you try it just the once. On the flip side of that, it's important to remember that a lot of people will use drugs or substances in order to help feel or better or relieve some mental health problems. However, that's often not the case. But often people will assume because they haven't got pre-existing problems or anything going on for them that trying it won't impact them. And that's not necessarily the same either. So actually having no mental health problems doesn't change the amount of risk that trying a drug would have on you. So I'm not going to ask you all never to ever have an alcoholic drink, but I would say look after yourselves. There's a saying that everything in moderation is okay, although I think there are clearly some exceptions to that. I am not advocating any illegal drugs at all. I think actually you being in charge of yourselves is the best thing you can do, and that was really a substance low or a substance-less life. So talking about kind of keeping ourselves well, yes, there are all sorts of different things we can do. And what we often talk about with people, regardless of their age, is 5 key things. You could write list upon list of the things you should and shouldn't do. That's quite tricky to keep an eye on every day, actually. What are all the things I said I was going to do to keep myself well? But we have really 5 key areas that we focus on when talking to people as an organisation. And these are the 5 ways to well-being. And really it comes down to connecting with others, being around people, talking to people, having those networks, those supportive environments and relationships, being active. Now I'm not a gym fan, but I do make sure I get out and do something, even if it's just a 5-minute walk in fresh air. So being a bit active, whatever that looks like for you, can be really, really good for keeping you well. Taking notice. Now often people look at us a little bit like, what do you mean take notice? I'm sat here, aren't I? But there's very, very big difference between kind of passively going through the world and stopping to take notice. So one of my favourite things to do for me to take notice is actually to walk on wet grass barefoot. Most people that know me will know me as a person who goes to shop barefooted. I don't like to have shoes on, but also it's a great opportunity for me to really notice and take that time to be aware of my environment and what's going on around me. And it's important for me to do that regularly. So do that, ask the questions, be the annoying person in the class, question why you're wondering something, what can you see, smell, hear, taste. It's really good for just kind of rebalancing you and keeping your feet on the ground, literally, and keeping your well-being and keeping learning. So there are so many things that I've started learning to do and haven't done, but as they say, every day is a school day. And it might be about setting yourself a little goal. So I have certain hobbies that are about learning something new. I might read a book. I'm a bit of a textbook freak. I do love a good textbook to teach myself something new, but that doesn't have to be the same for you. It's whatever you're interested in. Even a Netflix documentary can be really helpful for kind of just bringing something new into your brain and just stretching that muscle. So doing those sort of things can keep us really well. And the last one that we would talk about is giving. Now, when I talk to little children about this, the first thing they often say is, I'm not giving up my Xbox. And I'm not advocating giving up Xboxes, toys, sweets, clothes, anything like that, but giving a nice comment, a nice smile, 5 minutes talking to a friend. It actually gives something back to you, and there's research behind it that I really won't go into, but actually talking to others and giving back can be really helpful for you. Exercise. We talked a little bit about exercise, so I'm not going to go on to it, but actually the key message is little and often. That first 20 minutes regularly is really helpful for you. So you do not have to do a massive exercise routine, but just a little bit every now and then will keep you well. And other tips and tricks for keeping well. We've talked a little bit about setting yourself a little goal, talking to others. Some people create a hope box for the times they're feeling down, and often this is things that make them feel good. So whether it be a photo or a piece of music, a particular storybook, talking to others, drawing. A lot of people really find drawing really helpful. So it's useful to kind of have those things in your background to kind of keep you well. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit was emotional intelligence. Now, often we hear the word intelligence and we think exams, tests, scores, and actually that's not emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence refers much more to your ability to understand and manage your own emotions, as well as other people's. So the argument would be that actually there's different stages that people can have in terms of developing an emotional intelligence. And these are about kind of recognising emotions in yourself and others, understanding what that means with you, and then turning that into, how do I manage this? So often a young person who will get very, very angry at mum or dad will be feeling anxious underneath it. So it's having that ability to kind of recognise, process, and then managing yourself, but also the higher end of that will be implying that to others. And I want you to really be clear that actually you can be the worst person at maths in the world. It doesn't mean the same will be for your emotional intelligence. That is a very separate thing. And often linked into that will be resilience. So we talk about resilience in terms of the ability to bounce back often. And there are things you can do actually that help support that. And that's about having those good relationships with others. It's about keeping an eye on what you can control in yourself. Being aware that you're falling into those negative thought patterns, and I'm going to give you an example of some of them later, and pushing back against kind of what we call catastrophizing, where you might say everything's going to go wrong, it's all going to be awful. So letting yourself get things wrong, which I do quite regularly, but then also being able to forgive yourself and bounce back from that is really important. So how do you help yourself and others? So one of the first things people will say to me is, Katie, can you give me a bit of advice? This person is just not themselves. And when we talk about it, they'll talk about suddenly they've stopped eating, or they don't want to go out anymore, they've stopped doing things. They've started avoiding doing things they used to do. There are also physical sensations. So for me, when my mental health's not good, actually the first thing that will come across is I'll probably get ill. I'll get a cold, or I'll be a bit achy. So noticing those changes in yourself and in those around you is probably the really good things. And then saying to someone, actually, are you all right? You don't seem yourself. Are you okay? So kind of just checking in with that all the time. But with yourself as well, we've got a saying, actually, you know, the car doesn't run without fuel in it, and it's the same for you. You've got to look after yourselves before you can help other people as well. One of the biggest things that we see all the time, that I think we've probably all experienced at one point, is anxiety. What is anxiety? Anxiety is actually a survival instinct. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's something that we need. It actually keeps us safe. So years and years and years ago, actually, we had things like dinosaurs and saber-toothed tigers to be really worried about. And actually, that physiological response, that shaking, the sweating, the feeling sick, is all about enabling your body to run away from threat. Now, we don't actually have very many saber-toothed tigers anymore. So unfortunately, our brains, whilst they've evolved loads and loads and loads, they are still also quite old in some ways. So instead of having those responses to saber-toothed tigers, we often have them to more modern things that we're more familiar with. So for me, public speaking. So the situation for me will be, okay, I've got this public speaking, and I'll have these thoughts and patterns and behaviours and sensations that go around. So for me, my first thoughts were, I'm going to be rubbish at this. Everyone's going to think I'm laughed at. I'm going to forget everything. I'm not going to know what I'm saying. And actually, the emotions in me are about that anxiety. I can tell you now, I'm feeling a little bit hot and sweaty, and my heart's rushing a little bit. So that my temptation, first of all, was to say, I'm really sorry, I'm busy, I can't do it. I might get really angry that actually it's not going the way I wanted it to. And I can tell you now, for without a doubt, I've checked this presentation a million times. I've kind of gone into that constant check-in to reassure myself and try and reduce that anxiety. And it'll be different things will trigger that response in all sorts of different people, but it's a replacement reaction to the things that historically were dangerous to us. But it's very, very normal, and it's very, very healthy. We'd actually be really, really in a lot of danger if we didn't have that. So life is a bit of a roller coaster. We are survivors. We have these really tricky brains that really help us out, but also really drop us in a mess every now and then. So it's about kind of keeping on track with the things that you're struggling with. Knowing actually when I've got a problem, what am I going to do about this? What's setting this off for me, and what can I do about it? So quite often we'll sit with people and just say, okay, so what's the problem? What are the options? What are we going to try first? Knowing the things that can really protect you, what we call our protective factors, and this is often those 5 ways to well-being: having good relationships, having good access to resources, knowing who you can turn to, keeping up with your everyday activities, like even making sure you get out of bed. For some people might be the first step to just staying well. And being aware of the things that can harm you. So if you're having a rough time and you are drinking a bit too much, or you're eating a bit too much, or actually you stop doing those things, they're the things to kind of spot and replace those with some really good habits. And having a bit of a plan. So I might have been doing this for, I don't know how many years now, but I still have a bit of a plan about what to do. And I tend to do this plan when I'm feeling good. So actually having a plan about, if I'm having a rough day, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to change that and turn that day around? One of the things that my team do as a team, and you can do this with friends, family, whoever's around you, is we have a "if I'm struggling, I need you to" session. So all my staff know, actually, if I'm struggling, they will notice that I'm probably a bit grumpy, and I will probably be far too busy, and I'll be sitting there going, yeah, I'll have a drink in a minute. And actually what they do is then say, no, Katie, you need to stop now and have a cup of tea. Because actually they know that that's me struggling is because I'm not doing what I need to. And I know the same about them. So I know everyone's individual kind of things that they tend to do when they're struggling. And actually that's something that can be really, really helpful. But that doesn't mean you're alone with it. And it's important that if you're saying something that giving you that funny sensation in your tummy that just doesn't feel right, you do share that with someone. You're not responsible for everyone around you. Find a trusted adult. So if someone is doing something that just makes you feel a bit iffy, share it. Definitely share it. Don't keep it to yourselves. Okay, now actually, I've got 2 stories for you now, and then some resources, and I'll leave you to it. Now, this first story is Jessica's story, and this is written by a 16-year-old girl that we've known to the service for a while. Jessica is not her real name; that's the name she asked me to use. First time I read this, it made me cry. So if I get a little bit wobbly, I'm really sorry, but these are her words, and they're as she wrote them. I've not changed this at all. But I asked her if she'd be prepared to do this, and she did. So this is Jessica's story, and this is what she wants you to know about her. Hello, I'm Jessica, and this is my story. When I was 6, my life changed, as my dad got injured in the army and is now a single amputee. This affected me in many different ways, mentally, physically, emotionally. From all of the trauma, I developed auditory processing difficulties, which makes me take time to process things, because when it happened, I was in year 2, where you learn 1 and 2 digit numbers using multiplication division. However, with my dad being in a critical position, I didn't focus on school and I wasn't bothered about it. All I was bothered about was my dad surviving his injuries. It took him 4 years to fully recover because he was so badly injured. When I was in school, I needed extra support from the auditory processing, so I had to have an assistant teacher throughout my school years, all the way through to year 11 that I've just finished. Throughout my school years, I got bullied because of what happened to my dad and because of my size. I always developed before everybody else, and I've always been bigger. I used to be called the BFG in primary because that stood for Big Fat Giant, which used to make me feel very emotional and hate the way I looked. Having to deal with my dad and school and the bullying became too much, so I first got support from Mind when I was 8. I always used to feel angry about what happened to my dad, because in primary school I was known as the kid with the dad with no leg, the big girl, and to top it all off, 2 years ago I was told I had ME, which is a chronic fatigue syndrome. This makes it hard for me to do things as I've become tired really quick. It stops me from being able to lose weight and get fitter as quick as I would like, but I keep trying. My tiredness and feelings of anger and sadness have made me feel depressed, and I've had thoughts of not being here. I didn't like to tell my family and friends because I didn't want them to deal with my suffering. At one of my specialist appointments, I broke down and everything came out in front of my mum. That was a big turning point for me. Realising, oh, it's not going to let me roll down. Realising that I needed more help or I'd get worse. The specialist wrote a letter to school and my mum got in touch with Mind. I started seeing a counsellor again when I was 14 to help me cope with how I felt about ME and to talk about how I feel about my self-image and try to love myself again. But let's fast forward to March 2020, when COVID meant I left secondary school not knowing whether I'd be doing my GCSEs, when I'd see my friends again, and whether I'd get to wear my prom dress. I celebrated my 16th in June with close family and friends visiting me in stages. It was so good to see them. Lockdowns made me appreciate my friends more because having my ME, they motivated me to keep going, and knowing I was going to see them at school made me push myself to get up even though I was so tired. So where am I now? I've got my GCSE results and passed 6 subjects. Okay, I didn't get top marks or distinctions, but I passed, and with all the challenges I've had, that's okay. I'm now enrolled in college to do animal management level 3. There were times I never thought I would achieve this, but I'm feeling nervous but excited. I didn't stop there. I went out and got myself a job. It's very tiring and hard work, especially with my condition, but I haven't told anyone else because it doesn't make me the person I am today. So this is the next step in my story. I know I'll have some ups and downs throughout my journey, but I've come this far with the help of others around me in mind. So I'll end this message to all young people out there who are struggling. If I can do what I've done so far, so can you. So I managed to get through that, which I'm very proud of. And then the other story I want to tell you is about 2 girls. And these are 2 real life people. Both have received support for mental health difficulties. The first one was 19 years old. She lives at home with her mum and dad. She had a really good, she was too scared to sit her exams. She wanted to go to university and then was referred in for support for anxiety to manage that. She did receive support, and she made a little bit of progress, but she didn't ever make it to university. She decided that actually she didn't feel she could take that challenge any further. The other girl is 23 years old. She was a single mum. She was 4 years old. Her dad was killed in a car accident, and her mum became an alcoholic to manage this. She dropped out of all her hobbies. She also didn't finish school or attend college because she was at home looking after her mum, who by that time was quite poorly. Mum then died when she was 17. She worked in a school, and then actually she started asking for support. Her son was too scared to go into his school play and was refusing to attend. So just in your mind, I want you to think about where that girl might be now. It's fair to say we were talking about the factors that might trigger mental health problems, and she did really struggle. She was very, very anxious, and often wouldn't fulfill the things she wanted to do. This is where that girl is now. Now, for those of you that are a bit more perceptive, you might notice that that's me. I now hold 9 gold, 2 silver and 3 bronze medals for competitions internationally at karate. My son did go to his school play, I will tell you that as well. And I've competed in front of 11,000 spectators, and I got my black belt. And what I want you to recognise is that I made a choice. And this is what I was going back to locus of control, is that you can have many, many barriers in your life, but you have a choice about what you do with them. I chose to make a decision to fight back, to push through, to go through the tough times, and not let those things define me. So I would encourage you all to do the same. It is achievable. I'll tell you now, 11,000 spectators is pretty scary, but the amount of good feeling that comes from having done it is amazing. And I really look forward to hearing that so many of you will go on and achieve those things, even though it's tricky, and not be defined by the things that may get in your way. And finally, I will send this to Frank so that he's got it all for everybody. But I have got a list of different sources of support for everybody. Now, some of these are available nationally. Some of them are in more secluded areas, but most of them are available nationally. So I will send these to you all. Some of them are different apps as well that we would use with people we work with. And that's it from me.